Hi everyone and welcome to today's video. This is a B1 level language arts video, and today we're going to be talking about literary techniques. So in the last lesson we looked at a short story about Kayla's test. If you can think back, remember, and summarize that story using the pictures and the table to help you. So just write a short summary discussing the characters, the setting, plot, the conflict, the theme, and the ending. So think about the story and then discuss these questions. Did you like the story? Why or why not? And how did the story make you feel and why? So the descriptive writing unit introduced some literary techniques, and so we're going to match each with its description and then an example. So for example, we have simile, the technique, which means comparing two things using like or as. And then here, the example would be, it was as white as snow. All right, so go ahead and try that for the rest of these and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. All right, a metaphor. So that is comparing two things by saying that one thing is the other, not using like or as, but saying the thing is the other. So an example of that would be, see, his words were music to my ears. I'll change color here so we can keep all of these straight. Onomatopoeia. So onomatopoeia is, let's see, using words that share the sound of the thing being surprised, or described, sorry. And an example of that would be his feet crunched through the fresh snow. So the word crunched sounds very similar to the sound that your feet make when you're walking through kind of frozen snow. Okay, hyperbole is using an exaggeration, a meaning that is much greater than the real meaning. And so an example of that would be, it's going to take us years to finish this homework. Well, it's not literally going to take years, it's just going to take a long time. All right, emotive language. So that would be using language that creates a strong emotional response in the reader. So that would be an example of that would be, it was a truly painful experience. And finally, repetition. Saying the same words or phrases multiple times. I know it's going to be tough. I know it's going to be difficult. All right, so we're going to look again at the first part of the story about Kayla and the test. And so then see if you can answer these questions. So again, you can pause the video, maybe reread this on your own if you need to refresh your memory, and then answer the questions, and then you can restart when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so what emotions does the writer create in this part of the story? Well, she stares down at the blank page, so maybe she's confused, shifted in her seat, she's comfortable. She sighs, so maybe means she's frustrated. Um, all of these are emotions that, oh, and actually then he says it was hopeless. So that's another emotion that she might feel. So Kate sighed. When do people usually sigh? And what is this? What technique is this an example of? People can sigh when they're tired or frustrated. Um, And so sigh is I would think that would be an example of onomatopoeia because the word sighed kind of sounds like a sigh when you're like, that's the sound of a sigh. And when somebody sighs, it sounds a lot like the actual sound. So I would say that's onomatopoeia. His strong gaze was a laser beam burning through her. So what technique is that? So strong gaze, and it says it was a laser beam, not like a laser beam, it was a laser beam. So that is a metaphor. And then how is it different from he looked at her? Well, it's really creating a stronger impression than if just saying he looked at her. You know, his strong gaze was a laser beam burning through her. It means that he's looking at her very intensely. And are there any other literary techniques in this part of the story? So just think about that. I don't see any that are rare, that are obvious, but you might have some thoughts on that. All right, now in the second part of the story, again, you can pause the video and try that on your own, and then restart when you're ready to see the answers to the questions. All right, so what emotions does the writer create in this part of the story? Um, well, here she um, maybe starts to feel a little bit hopeful. You know, she remembered something and all she had to do. A feeling of joy. You know, she starts to feel happy. There's also a feeling maybe of tension, nervousness, and, you know, desperation. Uh, the tricky part, knowing that this is a very delicate thing that she's trying to do. And how does the word elation feel different to happiness? Well, elation would be an extreme form of happiness. It's a much more emotive word. You know, a person could be happy, but if they're elated, they're extremely happy. And so, why does the writer choose to use this word? So let's find where. Um, Not sure. Let's see. Where they use? Do they use elated actually in this? I don't see where they actually use the word elated, but you know, elation could be, you know, she feeling very excited, feeling very happy that she remembers that there might be a way out of the problem that she has of not being able to remember what to write or think of what to write. A feeling of joy flowed through her like a river down a mountain. And what literary technique is this an example of? Well, flowed like a river, that would be simile because you're comparing two things using like or as. And why do you think the writer uses it here? Well, when she remembers, she's happy, but it's also fairly calming. You know, she'd been panicking because she didn't know what to write. And then suddenly she remembers, like, oh, I have these notes. And she's happy, but also it allows her to maybe just relax a little bit and think there might be a way out of this problem. And are there any other literary techniques in this part of the story? Um, well, the carefully, slowly, silently, those are kind of emotive words. Where she searches desperately. Again, that's very desperation is a very strong emotion. Again, like we said, the tricky part, um, very she's concentrating, you know, trying not to get caught. And then here, easy, easy, a bit more, nearly there. That's an example of repetition. All right, again, take another look at the third part of the story and then answer the questions. And then restart the video when you're ready to check your answers. So what emotions does the writer create in this part of the story? Um, well, here the probably surprise, shock, um, and then she's, worried about possibly being expelled, nervous. So again, so just a lot of tension in this part of the story. And what verbs does the writer use to describe how Mr. Lee and Kayla speak? So Mr. Lee's voice boomed, and that would be an example of onomatopoeia because a boom is something very loud and forceful. And if he shouts at her, what are you doing? So that would be a booming voice. And then she stammered. She stammered. So again, onomatopoeia. When you stammer, these are kind of um, sounds that a stammer actually sounds like. So then she said, every muscle in her body shook. So that would be kind of an example of hyperbole. So probably not every single muscle in her body is shaking, but that's an exaggeration to show how nervous she is. Her heart was pounding in her chest like a drum. That's simile. And so it just means that her heart was beating very fast and very strong. And if there are any other literary techniques in this part of the story, all right, and now we're going to look at the last part of the story and discuss the questions. So what emotions does a writer create in this part of the story? Well, here there's sort of relief when she says she'd gotten away with it and she was the luckiest girl in the world. But there is probably still the original feeling of desperation or despair because she still has no idea what to write. And again, she was the luckiest girl in the world. I think that would be an example of hyperbole, sort of an exaggeration, but just shows that she feels extremely lucky about not getting caught. And it shows the reader that she feels a lot of relief about, not having actually cheated. And what is the last line of the story? Well, she had no idea what to write. Where did you see this line earlier? So that was in the beginning, in the very beginning. And so this would be a technique of repetition to kind of bring the story full circle to show that the original conflict is still there. And again, try to think if there are any other literary techniques in this part of the story. So one thing here, she looked down and the empty page stared back at her. Again, that would probably be hyperbole because a page can't literally stare, but she's looking at this just empty blank page and still doesn't know what to write and probably feels again panicked about failing this exam. All right, so students are often asked to write essays answering questions about the techniques writers use and their effects. So look at the question below and how would you answer this question and what would you write in your essay? So what emotions does the writer create in the story and how does the writer do this? Well, that's some of the things that we've already talked about. The language that he uses, the literary techniques, repetition, the word choices, So all of those things help to create the emotions of fear, panic, nervousness, desperation. So all of those things that we talked about before. All right, so Juvela answers the question and read the first part of her response. And did she mention any of your ideas? Again, you can pause the video, read this on your own, or you can follow along as I read. In the first part of the story, the writer creates an uncomfortable feeling. Describing Mr. Lee, the writer writes, "His strong gaze was a laser beam burning through her." The writer uses a metaphor to describe how Mr. Lee looks at Kayla. Words like laser beam and burning are linked to pain. As a result, an uncomfortable feeling is created. Right, so now we're going to analyze Juvela's response. And so a common way to organize paragraphs when we write essays, analyzing stories, is to use something called the PEEL method. And PEEL is an acronym meaning point, example, explanation, and link. So point, what is the main point you are making in the paragraph? And this should directly answer the question. Well, in the first part of the story, the writer creates an uncomfortable feeling. So that's the main point that Juvela is making in her response. Then she needs to provide an example. Find an example from the text that shows your point. This should be a quotation from the text. So she says, describing Mr. Lee, the writer writes, "His strong gaze was a laser beam burning through her." So this is an example of how the writer has created that uncomfortable feeling by the use of that metaphor. And then explanation. Explain how this example shows your point. Explain clearly what the writer does. So the writer uses a metaphor to describe how Mr. Lee looks at Kayla. Words like laser beam and burning are linked to pain. And then the link, you have to link back to the original question and restate your main point in other words. So as a result, an uncomfortable feeling is created. So that's the PEEL method. All right, now we're going to read Juvela's second paragraph from her response, and you'll decide whether or not this paragraph follows the PEEL method, and if so, then highlight each part. And there's one vocabulary word, relief. It's a feeling of relaxation after a time of anxiety or stress. So again, you can pause the video, try this part of the exercise on your own, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. So in the second part of the story, the writer builds a sense of relief. The writer states, "A feeling of joy flowed through her like a river down a mountain." Here the writer uses a simile to express how Kayla's feelings have changed. Water in a river is often cool and refreshing. Consequently, the reader can experience a feeling of relief. All right, and I'll use the colors that they use to try to, as we go through the points. So what is the main point you were making in the paragraph? And this should directly answer the question. So what feelings, that was the original question, what feelings does the writer create? So here in the second part of the story, the writer builds a feeling of relief. So that does follow the point in PEEL. Okay, and then next there should be an example in quotations. So the writer states, "A feeling of joy flowed through her like a river down a mountain." So that is an example of the feeling of relief. Then explanation. So explain how this example shows your point and explain clearly what the writer does. So here the writer uses a simile to express how Kayla's feelings have changed. Water in a river is often cool and refreshing. And then the link back to the question restates your main point. Consequently, the reader can experience a feeling of relief. So this second paragraph did follow the PEEL method. Okay, and then here are some ideas for language you can use when writing a Peel paragraph. To express the point, you might say something like, in the first part of the story, the writer creates. In the second part of the story, the writer builds. In the last part of the story, the writer develops. For examples, describing Mr. Lee, the writer writes, or the writer states, an example of this is, we can see this when the writer writes. Explanation, the writer uses a metaphor. Here the writer uses a simile. This shows, this is an example of. And then the link, as a result, or and consequently. All right, so now you're going to look at Juvela's third paragraph, look at some notes that she's taken for her third paragraph, and then you're going to write the paragraph using the Peel method. So she's already pulled out the points. The main point is that the writer creates a feeling of tension, and the example of that is every muscle in her body shook. The explanation is hyperbole to show how nervous Kayla is, and the link is that the reader can clearly understand the tense situation. So go ahead and try to write that paragraph. You can use this language to help you, and also the notes that Kayla has taken. All right, and now you're going to plan your own Peel paragraph for the last part of the story. So you'll make some notes in the table and again, answer the question, what emotions does the writer create in this story and how? So you can pause the video, read this on your own, and then restart when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so here, the point is actually that she had gotten away with it. Well, actually, so yeah, so you want to, the feeling is maybe relief. Kayla feels a feeling of relief. The example, she was the luckiest girl in the world. The explanation, so it's hyperbole, showing Kayla's intense feeling of relief. And this shows that Kayla is relieved about not getting caught cheating. However, she still has the problem of not knowing what to write. All right, so now go ahead and write your paragraph and use the language from the table. Make sure that your writing meets all the criteria. Using the Peel method, correct punctuation, mentioning literary techniques. And then if you would like some feedback on your paragraph, feel free to send that to me at my email address. And I'll give you some feedback as to whether I think that your writing used the Peel method, correct punctuation, and mentioned literary techniques. All right, so again, just as a review, make sure that you understand what the peel method is and what does each part of the peel method include. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Please like, subscribe, share, and if you have any questions, leave those for me in the comments. Also, if you'd like some feedback on your writing, be sure to send me that email. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.